The time has come for the Tapu Fini PvP IV Deep Dive, breaking down the important stat checks and PvP IVs that you want to get on your Tapu Fini for both the Great League and Ultra League PvP. And because you do have to trade to get Tapu Fini low enough to fit into the Great League, I'm also going to cover the probability of you trading into these better IVs so you know what to set your expectations for. If this is your first time checking out a PvP IV deep dive and you don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to breakpoints or specific stat checks, I highly recommend checking out my PvP IVs simplified video, link up above and in the description. Basically, get your feet wet before you dive off into the deep end here. And then of course, I do have my article up on GamePress, the Tapu Fini PvP IV deep dive, link in the description, which covers everything I talk about in this video, but in a text-based format, and then also has links to the PvP IV tables that I'm going to be showing off in this video. Without further ado, let's get into Tapu Fini. Here I have a table of the 240 ideal PvP IV spreads that we're looking for on Tapu Fini using good friend trades, so that's why we're seeing all these ones. If you're going to have great friend trades, then you got to get rid of these ones, and then there's no longer 240 different variations, right? And this table is customizable, so if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, you can change it from good friend to great friend to ultra friend, so you can know what your options are. If you're curious, here are the 4 with best friend trades. So you could do best friend trades all year and not get one of these IV spreads. So probably best to stick to like ultra friend, where you got 60 options, and great friend and good friend, right? And then also take note once again that these are all level 20. I guess this one's 20.5, right? Level 25 isn't going to work. So if you're trading with people for the Tapu Fini, trying to re-roll into the Great League, their Tapu Fini has to be like less than 2000 CP. If it's 2000 CP or higher, that means it's a level 25 weather boosted Tapu Fini, and it will never trade into the Great League. So just be mindful of that. So what stats is this table cut off here for? What are the important stat checks for Tapu Fini? And the main important stat check is going to be the HP. And the HP on this table here is set at 107 for a minimum. Now this is the ideal Tapu Fini. I do think you could get away with having at least 105 HP, maybe even a little bit lower. It's not like super dire for every single situation, but Tapu Fini in general is a type of Pokemon that's going to perform like much better, more consistently, or get out of those tight, narrow situations if it has a higher HP stat going on. When it comes to the 107, that can flip the Jellicent 1-1 shield scenario, and it also allows you to take on Altaria and Umbreon in the 2-2 shield scenarios using Moonblast only. So no need to bait with Surf in order to handle those Pokemon. You can just go straight Moonblast and still manage those matchups. So having 107 HP can be kind of a big deal. If you do thrift down to 106, then you'll still be able to maintain the Sableye 0-0 shield scenario and the Noctowl 2-2 shield scenario, which with the Noctowl one, and I guess the Sableye one to an extent, they can both be a little bit IV dependent on your opponent too. So it's helpful to have the 106, but not the end of the world if you don't. And then if you got the 105 HP, then that can help maintain the Sableye 2-2 shield scenario, the Walrein 2-2 shield scenario, and potentiates the Venusaur, the Shadow Venusaur 2-1 shield scenario. So they spend 2 shields, you spend 1 shield. I'm not too familiar with what goes on with HP stats below that. The current Tapu Fini that I've been rocking does have a lower HP stat there, and it hasn't really cost me a whole lot of matchups, so it's like, it's important for the matchups where it comes up and it matters, and then in general, just surviving with 1 HP and getting a charge move off, it can be a really big deal. But Tapu Fini itself is so powerful that if you just happen to have a good-looking one in general in the Great League, then that's also quite good. So yeah, if you go to the bottom of this table here and you want to see what IV spreads can also hit 105 HP, you can just change that HP number from 7 to 5. But personally, I think if you can, try to keep trading to try to get the 107 or higher HP stat. Now the next stat check that we have here is going to be the defense. I have this defense cut at 153.91. That doesn't exist for Tapu Fini, so it cuts at 154.12. And this is kind of like a soft check for Shadow Charizard. Its wing attack damage can get a breakpoint, And if you can avoid that breakpoint, then you have more consistency in the 1-1 shield scenario. If it lands the Blast Burn and it gets that extra wing attack damage on you, well then this fire type Pokemon can now flip that matchup against your water type Pokemon, which is just kind of silly. I feel like if you want to be extra safe, then try to be mindful for 154.65. So I think most of the IVs featured here will have that, defense stat or higher. But, just something to be aware of when it comes to Tapu Fini. Maybe if you're trying to do like a tiebreaker, and one has the higher defense stat, one's got, the higher HP stat, then you could just work that into your personal decision making. Now there is a Mew and a Azumarill breakpoint, and then possibly a Shadow, Charmalola, Ninetales breakpoint, and then if you got crazy high defense, there's even a Pelipper breakpoint that you could get if you got wacky high defense. But I feel like if you're put to the question, if you have options, you're going to want to side with the higher HP stat more often than not. But they are useful to be aware of, and maybe if you do get like a wacky high defense Tapu Fini with like at least 105 HP, it could be worth like starring for some wayward future where a high defense Tapu Fini ends up being more favorable in the meta than the higher HP one. But I would once again say that having at least 107 HP is a pretty big deal. When it comes to even higher HP stats, there really isn't too much of note after 107. I mean, obviously you've got like more potential for them 1 HP wins, right? So having 108 HP would be great and all. But things don't really seem to be all that significant until you cross the threshold of about 110 HP. More consistently with 111 HP, which is like the maximum that we're looking at here. But this allows you to manage Metacham in a wider variety of situations more consistently. So if fortune smiles upon you and you happen to get one of these really big HP Tapu Fini, well then congratulations. But the likelihood of you trading into one of these Tapu Fini is so low that I really wouldn't worry about it. If you get 107 HP or higher, then I'd just pat yourself on the back and be like, yes. Now there are two attack breakpoints that are worth highlighting. The first one being the Diggersby breakpoint starting at 114.46. So you can see here that, the highest level of bulk Tapu Fini won't be meeting that, but quite a few IV spreads will just happen to have that attack stat anyways. I wouldn't say it's the biggest deal in the whole world to get this attack breakpoint because how often do you fight the Diggersby? But it does make the Diggersby matchup a whole lot smoother because you do avoid the Earthquake more often if you have that attack breakpoint. So it's just something to be mindful of. And then with a wacky high attack stat, you could possibly get a breakpoint on the Shadow Swampert, which in an uneven situation that could allow you to once again avoid it throwing a Sludge Wave or an Earthquake. But you need like 117 higher than that even attack stat to get it consistently. And you can see here that we're capping out at 116.73 for this higher level of bulk Tapu Fini. So I think it's like a nice consolation prize, and if you are like pushing above 115 attack on your Tapu Fini, it is something to be like mindful to be aware of. If you are fighting a Shadow Swampert, are you getting the breakpoint or not? And then kind of work that into how you're going to handle that situation. But I don't really feel like the Shadow Swampert is exactly a goal in the current meta. Just something to be aware of. And it also gives good credence to you trying to get a higher defense stat on your Shadow Swampert, should you run one in Great League PvP. And if you want to ogle that PvP IV table for yourself, it's featured in the Tapu Fini PvP IV Deep Dive. Once again, linked in the description. So you can see here, Great League, the general good, and then I also got the Ultra League IV spreads here as well. And then everything I just talked about in a text-based format as well. So now that we know which PvP IVs we're looking for in Tapu Fini, how many trades are we going to have to do to get it, right? Well, if you're just doing good friend trades, so you have the IV floor of 1 for re-rolling, it should take you roughly 11 to 23 trades to have a 50% to 75% probability. So the 23 is a 75% probability, so it could take you like 30 plus trades to have, a 90% probability, and you could trade for the rest of your life and never get one because it is rolling the dice, right? And sometimes the dice just don't like you. But I think you could reasonably expect to do about 20-ish trades to get the ideal Tapu Fini. Now, if you bump up to Great Friend, where the IV floor is 2, well, that's going to bump up the odds to 17 to 35 trades. So it's looking a little bit more dire. Go to Ultra Friend, things start to look a bit worse. We got 33 to 67 trades. Now, it doesn't sound too bad at first, but then you realize that that's like over a month worth of just straight trading Tapu Fini with people to try to reroll one of these specific IVs. Maybe you want to be a little bit selective with who you're trading with and just stick to the good friends or the great friends. And then when it comes to best friends, as I showed you before, there's only 4 IV spreads that can get it. So for a 50% probability, like a 50% chance, you'd have to do 230 best friend trades. 75% chance, 460. It's not chance, it's probability, but you know what I'm saying here. It's a lot of freaking trades if you want to get that Tapu Fini. But as they say, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, and if it's like a rainy day out, you got nowhere to go, and you're at home with your best friend, and they got a Tapu Fini, it wouldn't hurt, right? But I wouldn't expect anything from it. Now, let's say you did about 20 plus trades already, and you're sitting there looking at your Tapu Fini, not having the 107 HP going, Ryan Swag, how much does this 107 HP matter? Does everybody run around with 107 plus HP Tapu Fini? And I gotta tell you, no. Not everybody has that. They'd like to have that if they know better, but you can still use Tapu Fini with a lower HP stat. Like I said earlier on in the video, having a 105 HP stat I feel is perfectly acceptable for a wide amount of scenarios for Tapu Fini. It's just having the 107 HP is that extra level of consistency that makes things a little bit nicer. For instance, I talked to Lurgan Rocket. Lurgan Rocket got 4th place in the 2022 World Championship for Pokemon Go, and he used Tapu Fini, right? And was the Tapu Fini he using really big HP? Not quite. It was only 105 HP on his Tapu Fini. Now, the Tapu Fini he's used in regionals this year for 2023 has had a higher HP stat. He traded up. He got a better Tapu Fini, where he didn't feel like that lower HP was really holding him back on his Tapu Fini, but he is still looking to improve the Tapu Fini because, you know, bigger HP, more consistency equals more wins. So it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it is something to be mindful of. I also talked to Enhoff. Enhoff got 2nd place at Peoria for 2023 Regional Championship. The Tapu Fini lover. Some say she heckin' loves Fini. And we didn't get into a big discussion about it, but her Tapu Fini's got really big HP. So she doesn't have any insights or considerations for a lesser Fini because she's not living that lesser Fini life. She's already swagging it up with the big HP Tapu Fini. And as far as myself goes, I used Tapu Fini at the 2023 Fort Wayne Regional, got a top 16 finish with it, and my Tapu Fini only has 104 HP. And I was really nervous about bringing the Tapu Fini, but my friend Amine Joke talked me into it. I was actually using Amine Joke's Shadow Sand Slash team. And I was really nervous about my Tapu Fini because I was like, man, I know about the stat checks, I know about the IVs, and I don't have 105 HP, and you know, it's going to hold me back. I know it. I'm going to lose that matchup, and I'm going to feel so bad because I just have a slightly defective Fini going on here. And in all my matchups, it never came up. In fact, I had a really tight matchup against Grostradamus, I think in our 2nd round, where it came down to my red HP Tapu Fini against his red HP Lickitung. Neither of us had anything close to a charge move. It was just fast move versus fast move, HP versus HP. And in that moment, my mind was like, this is it. This is the time. I'm going to lose because I don't have 105 HP or higher. But I ended up winning by like just 1 HP. Like you couldn't even see the line. It was so low. And I think it just goes to show that, you know, Tapu Fini is really good. It does what it does well. If you don't have the most premium IVs for it, it can hold you back, but how often does that situation come up, right? But even so, you know, I got my slightly deficient Tapu Fini. Am I going to be trading up for a better one? Oh, you better believe it, right? Now, I'd like to wrap up the video here, but people want to know about Ultra League Tapu Fini. Ultra League Tapu Fini is pretty good, and there's no Azumarill to really compete with it. It's had a pretty good showing here. Now that Jellicent has Surf. It's got a little bit of competition for like the anti-fighter water type role. But having that resistance to dark instead of weakness to dark obviously is a pretty big deal. So yeah, Ultra League Tapu Fini is a little bit of a big deal, right? So what IVs are we looking for on the Ultra League Tapu Fini? And I gotta say, it's not so dire. Here, I have 582 different options for trade-weighted Tapu Finis, of course, linked in the article in the description. It might be a little bit easier to just look at it on this sheet, which are the raid-caught Tapu Finis, where you have 14 different options, but you don't have to trade to get them. So if you're raiding Tapu Fini and you happen to see these magic numbers here, well, congratulations. This list here is cut off on 139 HP, which is important for the double 0-0 shield scenario against the best buddy double, and a handful of other matchups. It's just good to have big HP on Tapu Fini in general, so I figured if I'm going to have a cutoff point for a raid caught Tapu Fini, 139 may as well be it. And then we're also cut at 198.9 defense, which is a breakpoint for the best buddy wing attack Pidgeot, which can enable the 1-0 and 2-1 shield scenarios against a Pidgeot if that Pidgeot happens to be baiting you most perfectly. It just makes things a bit more consistent against that particular Pokemon. But if you're going to drop any stat here in favor of like higher HP or attack, I think defense could be considered a bit of a dump stat. Then when it comes to the attack, I don't have a cut here on the attack, but having a bit higher attack weight from this list in particular could be a little bit better because at 147, which, okay, we don't have to worry about that, but 147.6 attack, you can get charge move priority against a Poliwrath, which can enable you to flip the 1-2 shield scenario. And then there's also a breakpoint on Aurorus, which can enable the 0-1 shield scenario against that Ice Rock Pokemon. They really won't appreciate you getting that attack breakpoint. And if you have 149.39 or higher attack, then you can get a breakpoint on the normal Alolan Ninetales, not the Shadow version. And against the Powdered Snow one in particular, then that can enable you to overcome it at a shield deficit. So like the 0-1 and 1-2 shield scenarios. If you're up against the rank 1 Alolan Ninetales, non-Shadow, Powdered Snow version in particular, 149.39 attacks. So these top four here would be hitting that Goldilocks zone. Of course, if you do trade to get into Great League, you'll have 582 different options to consider, so it is pretty long. And, are some of these trade-weighted ones better than others, right? You got 113.15. That's like really big bulk. We're not getting the CMP, we're not getting the breakpoints, but man, this defense and HP has to pay off somewhere. And I will say that if you are trading for Great League, there are some nice benefits that you can get if you happen to get like 141 or 142 HP stat for a Ultra League Tapu Fini. With that higher HP stat, you can overcome Umbreon in the 1-2 shield scenario, straight Moonblast. You can also possibly overcome Trevenant in the 2-1 shield scenario where you'd expect to just lose 100% of the time, but because of that extra HP stat, you're able to hang on just that much longer and possibly overcome the Trevenant there. And then you also have potential to overcome Registeel in the 1-0 shield scenario. Now, it can be a bit breakpoint dependent. I wouldn't feel too comfy in that situation. But, having that higher HP gives you that much more potential to possibly flip that matchup. And it can possibly also help out in the Cobalion 2-2 shield scenario, but it's also kind of wonky and dependent on Cobalion's IVs, so I wouldn't think too much about that one. I'd still be cautious even if you got this bigger HP stat. But hey, big HP can help out. As far as having a higher defense stat goes, I really didn't notice a whole lot there. I mean, obviously having more defense means that you could take less damage from your opponent's charge moves, which would make your HP stat that much more consistent, right? But there weren't any like defense breakpoints of significance that I noticed aside from the Shadow Machamp defense breakpoint, but Shadow Machamp will very likely have a high enough attack weight where even the highest defense Tapu Fini won't be able to protect itself against it, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. If anything, this is good information for a Shadow Machamp user to know. The attack stat that you're looking for on your Shadow Machamp is reasonably about 175.11, but if you want that perfect max consistency, like the, I don't know, max defense Tapu Fini is just lurking out there for you, right? Well, 175.77 will guarantee it, I believe. Unless I thrifted a bit, but I'm pretty sure that guarantees it. And ironically enough, I did a Shadow Machamp Ultra League PvP IV deep dive over a year ago. I'll link up above and a description to that. And the recommendation all the way back then was 175.5 on the attack stat or higher for a whole bunch of like CMP situations and other matchups. I don't know. One of the big criticisms I get with like my PvP IV deep dives is, man, Ryan, you're recommending these goofy attack weights and stuff. Well, what happens when the meta changes? What happens a year or two from now and some new Pokemon comes out and now you no longer want that attack stat, now you want more bulk? And I mean, it's been over a year for Shadow Machamp, and here we have a brand new reason for it to have the attack stat I recommended back then, so there might be something to note about that. At any rate, that's all I gotta say about Tapu Fini right now. If you have any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description.